Hello everyone, this is James from Tin Robot Games, and this is Making a Game web series, where you get to follow along with us making a game. In this particular case, we're making a card game that's been in my family for over 100 years. So this reskinning that we're doing of the game is based on a story of Mary Queen of Scots. So I thought for this particular episode, we can go through what the actual story is that I found out through our research.
Resistance to fun is futile.
The year is 1542, and James V of Scotland is dead. 6 days earlier, his infant daughter and only legitimate heir was born, Mary Stuart. So at 6 days old, she becomes the Queen of Scotland. Now over the next 16 years, she has different regents running the country for her, and she's married off to the Dauphin of France, Francis of France. So Francis ascends to the throne in 1559, making Mary the Queen Consort of France and at the same time, Mary Queen of Scotland. A year later, he dies of an ear infection, leaving her a widow. So at the age of 19, she decides she's going to go back to Scotland and rule as their queen. Now, unfortunately, when she comes in, Scotland has changed quite a bit since she was an infant. It's become a lot more Protestant, and her being Catholic, she's kind of a foreigner in her own country. Now, the church at that time is led by John Knox, who was very outspoken about having a Catholic running the country, which is now a Protestant country. Now, over in England, Elizabeth is having some issues of her own. You see, she is in a Protestant country. She's Protestant herself, yet half that country is still Catholic, and they don't see her as being necessarily the legitimate Queen of England. They see Mary Queen of Scots as even having a better claim to the English throne than Elizabeth. Now, of course, Elizabeth is a little concerned that Mary may try to organize an overthrow of her, so she wants to keep a close eye on her. So she has one of her guys, Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, act as a communication liaison, and she opens up the communication channels back and forth with her cousin. As part of that, she decided, okay, maybe I can have someone from my inside group be on the inside of the castle in Scotland, and she tried to arrange a marriage between Robert Dudley, one of her lead statesmen, and Mary Stuart. Now, unfortunately, Robert Dudley didn't want to have anything to do with this because he actually liked Queen Elizabeth and wanted to be chosen as potentially one of her suitors. So he refused full out to marry Mary Queen of Scots. Now, at the same time, Mary kind of had something going or some interest in her cousin Henry Stuart. So she ends up marrying Henry Stuart, which kind of pees off Elizabeth because Elizabeth hadn't sanctioned that marriage. Now, everything goes great. She gets pregnant. 4 years later, she's about to give birth to the future king of both Scotland and England when her husband, Henry Stuart, in a fit of jealous rage, arranges to have her private secretary, who was rumored to be the father of her child, murdered right in front of her. And this was nasty. They held a gun to her head. She's pregnant. You got to imagine this. She's pregnant. They got a gun to her head. This secretary is trying to hide behind her because he sees these guys coming for him. They pull him away from her, tell her, do not move or you're going to be killed. And then they proceed to stab this guy 56 times right in front of her, and he dies in a pool of blood right in front of her. Now, of course, Mary isn't down with somebody being murdered right in front of her, especially one of her close friends. So a year later, mysteriously, Henry Stuart's residence ends up exploding, and when people rush to find out what's going on, they find him murdered in the front yard. Now, if that's not crazy enough, the guy that was accused of orchestrating this murder was James Hepburn. And James Hepburn ended up marrying Mary 4 months later. Now, of course, no one's really cool with this. People start uprising, and Mary and James Hepburn attempt to squash this rebellion. Unfortunately, it failed. They're captured. They're imprisoned at Loch Leven. Now, at Loch Leven, she's given options. You're going to stay here for the rest of your life, and we're probably going to murder you, or if you abdicate your throne to your infant son, we'll let bygones be bygones. So she's forced to abdicate her throne to her infant son, James. So Mary and James Hepburn manage to escape, and they try to do a rebellion of their own to try to reclaim this Scottish throne. Unfortunately, that fails. He goes off to some other country and dies a very lonely and apparently not stable life. Mary flees to England thinking she's going to be protected by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. Unfortunately, Elizabeth has some concerns of her own. Number one, Mary at one point had actually claimed she had a more legitimate claim to the English throne than Elizabeth did. And number two, half of England are Catholic, and they see Mary as being a more legitimate heir to the throne than Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is forced to keep Mary under house arrest, and she moves her around to different castles across England over the next 18 and a half years. Imagine being under house arrest for 18 and a half years. Now, over those 18 and a half years, there were several attempts by various Catholic groups to overthrow Elizabeth, and finally William Cecil was able to convince Elizabeth that Mary had to go. So, she was convicted of an assassination plot to kill Elizabeth. Most estimates were that that was actually just a false accusation, but it was their excuse to be able to sign the death warrant, sign the papers to have her executed. In 1587, she was finally beheaded at Fotheringhay Castle in England. So that's a very quick version of the Mary Queen of Scots story. What did you think? Did you like the story? I think this is going to be a great way to skin this game. Please join me at the next episode. We're going to get into some of the mechanics of the game and how we're going to skin those cards with some of the characters of the story that I just mentioned. Please subscribe down below. It helped me a great deal. Help you follow along in future episodes. Once again, thank you. This is James from Tin Robot Games.
Resistance to fun is futile.